Okay, greetings, brothers and sisters. Today is Saturday, December 21st, the solstice, the date of the lowest light of the year, the least amount of sunlight, winter solstice. Also, apparently now it's International Meditation Day for the UN. I covered that a little bit. One thing I left out is in my talk about that, if you guys listen to that other talk, I talk about how there's a guy who does the Sajmarg meditation who's, I call him the dodgy truther. He's an Indian preceptor. I think I met him one time. We were Facebook friends for a long time, but I never really knew him. And he is anti the Kamlesh Patel guy who has taken over and turned the Sajmarg system into the Heartfulness cult. I call him the dodgy truther because he's always posting stuff about how dodgy sucks on his face. He's got a whole Facebook page, and some of a following and whatever. But he wrote me yesterday as well, because I talked about this yesterday in a voiceover, and it reminded me that Charji, the Master Charji, the third Master System, died on the 20th, the day before the solstice, and of course Daji, who's thrown that guy under the bus, didn't even mention it, right? So there's a whole thing there. So this is going to be the introduction to the 170th edition to the Journey series, as well as to a standalone video. And I want to say that two things about, I talked about this recently, how, I finally am competent at life. Like, I finally, get it, after 60 years. And, I realized it, probably, not 60 years, but in my 50s, but I realized it sometime last year. I was talking about this in a voiceover, that I'm good at cooking food. I understand food, and I understand health, and I understand relationships, right? And I understand I understand what's going on in the world. Even in terms of being a truther, I understand I'm reality based about things. I'm not. I just get it, right? And, I'm starting to die. I'm in the death process, right? I have 20 to 30 years left, but, there's physical decline and mental decline, right? And, all these things. And, it's a big FU, I think this happens to pretty much everybody. It takes you so many years. And the other part that I talked about is, when you have had past lives as a human being, and not everybody does, there's a lot of first-timers here because of the vast amount of population. But if you've had, lots of lives, and there are some lives that you lived where you lived thousands of years, because there's people that did that here in different times and different, there's a whole thing about that. I've discussed that, in terms about genetic manipulation. The people that live now have been, have short lives almost purposefully. We were bred as slaves. This is, a generation of slaves, but there's different humans that lived much longer lives in different yugas, hundreds of years, maybe even thousands of years in some cases. And you accumulated skills and, whatever it is. It's there's two kinds of video games, and I don't know if the first one exists anymore. But there used to be video games like the first Mario Brothers, the first Mario video game, in which you had to start from the beginning every time. You would have 3 lives or whatever, and you could get as far as you could. But you had to get to the end of the game on those 3 lives. When you turned off the game and started again, you had to start from scratch, right? And then there are video games. I think pretty much all of them are like that now because they're more sophisticated and they're more time-consuming. We can start where you left off, even if you die. And, again, I have played video games in years, but those are the 2 video games. And life is where you start off from the beginning every time, but you are going to accumulate various skills and tools and sometimes bad shit, things that you have to overcome, what are called some scaras. If you have an addiction, you're going to have to deal with that in your next life. If you have addiction that you don't deal with If you have things that you haven't resolved in this life, you have to deal with it in the next life. So you have bad things that you're going to have to deal with, things that you're going to have to overcome. And you're going to have good things that you've accumulated that are there, but you're not going to get them immediately. Like, you're going to be born an innocent little baby, and you have this, potential, and you have this, these things that are there for you. There's a book, I think it's called the Autobiography of a Yogi, and it's by this guy, Yogananda. And I didn't read it, but one of the people that did the Sajmark system I used to be friends with told me that, this guy wrote that when he was a baby, he knew, like, he had all this stuff that he already knew. And, but he couldn't access it, right? And so, you become a parent, and some of it's just biological, and some of it's past life stuff. But, like, as a biological person, as a mom, you get pregnant, and all this knowledge is kicked in. All this, instinctual knowledge. I mean, it's for every species of animal that does some sort of parenting. Some animals parent. A lot of mammals, they'll raise their young, especially the moms, sometimes the dads. But they have this, this instinctual knowledge that's there. And then if there's past life experience, then there's that as well, right? And you're sort of absorbing and observing your parents, and you're observing, you're learning about parenting as a kid. So a lot of it's subconscious, and you're watching it. You're not thinking about preparing to be a dad or a mom yourself, but you're learning skills, right? And you're observing, and all of a sudden all that knowledge that you've sort of accumulated kicks in. And so as you go through life, you have these experiences that pull from you knowledge and abilities that you didn't know you have. Like, I was never a good public speaker, and I was never a good communicator. In fact, I was horrible at it. Like, I just didn't express myself very well. I was introverted. I didn't really love talking to people. And then when I did talk to people, I talked really fast. And sometimes in real life, I do that. And so for people who listen to my videos where I talk very slowly, they would be surprised at having a conversation with me, because I purposely take my time. People say that, it's too slow, but it's done purposefully. And there's a level of calm and a level of thought, where I choose my words more carefully, and the cadence and things is more relaxing and things to people. And so, like, it's just something I learned to do, and it wasn't something I was good at before. Like, I'm very good at articulating and communicating things now, and I wasn't before. And it was something that I had in me, and I had no idea, this potential. And it was pulled out by this experience. If I didn't make YouTube videos, it never would have been something I actualized. It would never be something that, that I was able to do something with. And so after all these years, like, I finally get it, right? I finally, understand life. And, I was thinking last night, I had trouble sleeping, like I was in a kind of meditative state. And I was thinking, like, how I could do my life over right now with all that I know, and I would do everything so much better, right? I just would be so much more successful at every aspect of my life if I could start over, as a child. You have these movies where people turn back time, where they become young again, or they switch bodies with their kid or something. Like, their soul goes into another person, a friend or a kid, right? Like, there's one called 17 Again, I think, where some guy goes back to when he was in high school or something, or, whatever. Or goes to high school, is all of a sudden made young again, and goes to high school as somebody with all the knowledge of an adult, but as a 17-year-old. And the thing is, you would be able to do it better if you've evolved at all as a person. You'd be able to relive your life and make better decisions. And even if they made the right decisions, you'd just be better at everything, right? But then I was like, it would be impossible for me to do any of this stuff again. Like, I couldn't live with my parents, right? Like, if everything in my life stayed the same, but I just was better at it. Well, if I went back as a kid, or someone in high school, I couldn't live with my incompetent fucking parents. I mean, it'd be impossible, right? Like, more consciously evolved and aware than they were when I was a kid. In many ways, they were really incompetent. And the food they ate and the whole energy in the house, and having to listen to them and lose control. Because as an adult, you make your own decisions, and just sitting through a freaking day of school, like as a kid, or as a kid in high school or elementary school or something, it'd be impossible, right? And so that's the kind of issue. Like, it would be so much better if you had all this knowledge, but once you have the knowledge, you can't do what you used to do. I couldn't be married to my ex. I couldn't spend even a minute with her, like, knowing what I know now. These things, right? All the things that you had to be in a certain state. I was in this thing called the Rahu period from Vedic astrology, where I was kind of asleep. I woke up when I was in my 30s. I mean, not just so much like when people say they woke up as a truther. I woke up as a human being. In my late 20s, I just, there was a tremendous, a thing that happened. My Saturn returned astrologically in the Rahu. There's a Vedic astrology, and there's a thing called the Rahu period. One of my viewers just left a comment that popped up my phone this morning that said that they were in a Rahu period, someone who's studying this stuff. And, I was in a long Rahu period that started when I was 10 years old, and, I fell off a tree and got a concussion. And when I was 14, I started using drugs and alcohol till I was in my 24 and 25. And then, I was in a kind of a dead relationship with, someone who was struggling. Not a bad person, but she was struggling with her own stuff and, whatever. And then I just had this sort of a series of epiphanies, and my consciousness changed in my 30s, and I started doing the Sajmarg meditation. There's, all these things. There was a waking up process, right? And, it's once you wake up, there's things that you can't no longer tolerate in your life. And whatever form of waking up, there's different forms. Of course, as truthers, people have these ways of waking up. But, in all this stuff, like, I couldn't do the jobs. I couldn't wait tables again. Like, you can't, the mundane aspects of some of these things you have to go through. Like, it's like you're in prison in some extent. You're so limited. And sometimes a relationship that's like a prison, and a job's like a prison. And you have to, like, dumb down yourself and go to sleep and be in a daze, self-medicate, right? Like, I couldn't be in a bar. Like, I couldn't go to a bar. Like, I couldn't do any of these things I used to do with my friends. I couldn't have some of the conversations I had. I couldn't, I just couldn't live those moments, those long days of under-functioning and being around, like, a low consciousness type situation. And so, you have this, like, this kind of, I don't want to call it dichotomy or whatever it would be. I don't know what this kind of dilemma or whatever, I don't know, paradox, something, where would be able to be so much better at your life, but you couldn't relive your life. Like, I couldn't start off where I am now when I was a kid. Like, just had to, you have to have a certain childlike consciousness to be a child, to deal with your parents, to deal with school, to deal with, life as a kid. If you were completely awake, it would be, torturous, right? And so, you have to be where you are to just like, the way that you live as an awoke person, someone who's awakened to whatever capacity. And there's different levels of awareness and consciousness. And the other piece to this is, the Sajmarg system of meditation, there is this idea that's put out that even if you don't feel good about your meditation, or you don't get what's happening, or it doesn't seem to be benefiting you, that you keep on doing it. And I had seen this, like, when I first started the meditation, and I, didn't watch much TV, and there's lots of times I didn't have a TV. But when I turned something on, and I must have had just network TV, it was on, like, the local PBS station. And it was this, they showed pictures. It wasn't like a real movie, but it was like there was pictures, but some of it was like they had, well, this is a story, and I'll give an example of how it was. There was a a kid in China, some village, and he got the ability to be a Shaolin, one of these monks, to take these kung fu and study the kung fu monks. And it was a poor village, and it was like a huge, like it was a huge, like winning the lottery. Like, and everyone in the village was so proud of him, and he went off to study. And they would show like pictures of areas, and then they would show like they showed him, they made him put his hands into sand, like he was pounding his hands into sand, and then he was doing all this other type of work, like just remedial work, scrubbing floors and toilets, and whatever it was, cutting vegetables, and just doing the basic kind of work that you would do, like almost like slave work. It's just sitting there doing it, and then they'd have him do some like exercises, like slamming his hands into sand and doing other things. And he was like, "This thing's a joke. I'm not learning any kung fu." And so he escapes, like I gotta get out of here. And he comes back home, and everyone's like, "Oh my God, here's the great guy." The whole village is like, in adoration of him, and he's quit and left, and they're talking how great he is, and they pat him on the back, and they want to hear about it. And all of a sudden he goes, "I'm a complete fraud." And he slams his hands down on a table, and the table cracks in half. And he's like, "Oh shit, I did learn something, right?" Like, he didn't think he was learning any kung fu. He thought it was just like a myth. That was just something they did to, like, to enslave kids and get them to do all this work for free or whatever it was. And then he realized, oh man, I gotta go back, right? This is like, there's something to this. And the Sajmark system of meditation, some of it's like that. Like, you're just checking the box, doing your practice, getting sittings, doing all the things. Some of it, like, I've had these huge experiences and epiphanies and realizations and, knowledge where I've read the books and, or just, from thinking, there's things that I'm aware of benefiting from, going through cleanings, what they call cleanings, where some of these impressions and some scars are, wear off, as well as, I can tell how, I was a very low functioning person when I started this. And, my awakening process happened through the Sajmark system in various ways, and my evolution as a person. So, I'm aware of the benefits. Like, I've been aware of the benefits. But, like, I just know, like, I don't get emotional anymore. I don't get emotionally riled up. Like, I see things when I watch the news. I have things in my personal life. And I use, I'm a quarter Sicilian and, very emotional family. My siblings, there's a lot of emotion, a lot of, negativity in my family. And it just isn't there. Like, I just don't react to things. Like, I don't care about them. And I, study things every day. I'm seeing the world and the worst shit every day. Like, and I've noticed, like, even the last couple of years, like, I don't have thoughts about things. I was having trouble sleeping last night, and I just don't, there's times I'm just laying in bed and I'm just not thinking about anything. I'm not asleep, but there's nothing going on in my mind. I don't have any, thoughts, and, I've just watched some kind of disturbing TV show called Eric, which I'll talk about on Netflix. And there's a lot of graphic imagery and things. I did a little bit of cleaning, like we do cleaning, of the day's impressions. And I'm not even thinking about stuff. I want to talk about the show a little bit. But I was just laying there for hours last night. Like, I had trouble sleeping. I fell asleep during something, the meditation or something we did every Friday night. And, like, I just don't have, it's just, I'm a totally different person. Like, I'm just, like, less reactive. Like, sometimes I get angry, but oftentimes it's like I eat something that doesn't agree with me. And I just have a general feeling of anger, but I don't have anything specific to be angry about. Like, I might think about something because I am angry and then get angry about that. But it's almost like just a shell of what it used to be, where I get angry a lot. Like, I just, like, all these things, and it's work. This Sajmark system has worked. Like, all these things have been cleaned out. All these things have been regulated in my system. My mind is much more under control. It just, like, just go on and off on its own. And, like, when people have, like, some kind of, a loop where you hear a song and you can't stop thinking about the song, or, you're mad at somebody and something's going on, or you're worried about something and you just can't stop thinking about it. I can just like flip a switch and not think about it. Like it just not, it's gone. Like it's not even a thing. When you meditate, you're supposed to treat these thoughts like as uninvited guests, where you just ignore them and you just, you allow them, and they, sometimes they're there for a little bit and then they just sort of dissipate. But after years of doing the system, like I say, the system there's been benefits that I just, just from punching the clock, just grinding it out. And it works away at a very, just wearing stuff down, and just like, and things just disappear that used to be there. Undesirable things, like, reacting emotionally things. Like it just doesn't, I could watch something that's kind of disturbing, or, just all the stuff I cover day in, day out. And it becomes just, I could be intrigued by something. I could, be engaged in watching like a football game or sports where I'm like, it's a good game, and like I'm interested in the outcome, and I'm rooting for one team. But if that team loses, like I don't feel anything. Like it's just, sorry, that's just what happened. It's still a good game, and I enjoyed watching it, whatever it is. And it just isn't some big deal. Like it doesn't, like I get like, people say they go kick their dog or whatever. I don't like, I just don't have any like in-depth emotional responses to things where it's painful. There's no hatred, no, like I said, very little like anger. That anger is usually something that's maybe like going on physically with me. Fear, or these, this is mild, whatever it is much, more natural. These emotions that are more naturalized in some way, where they're minimized. They're not overwhelming. They're not, they don't, I don't get stuck in a place for days or weeks or whatever. My feelings where I feel bummed out, like depressed. It's maybe an hour or so, like it's no, low energy and things. I mean, it's more often it's because I'm tired or whatever it might be. But I just like, go about my day, and, these things have all been regulated, with the thoughts being the biggest one, where oftentimes I'm just thinking about nothing. Like I'm just staring at the wall, and then things come to me. The other thing is, like, I always had a great memory as a kid, and, it serves me well here. But now I'm starting to have memory lapses, or where I just kind of blank out. And if I just stay in that blanked out stage, it's like I'll hear something. Like it's like the memories now, like information. The second master system, Babaji. He had some medical procedure back in, rural India, where it was, I mean, going from whatever traditional medicine they had, Ayurvedic medicine, to modern day medicine that was like so, allopathic medicine done wrong, right? Like back in the whatever. And he had to go and be anesthetized. I'm not going to pronounce that right. It's always something I struggle with. And they use like ether or something. I'm not sure. And when he woke up, his his memory was just like gone. Like his memory was never the same. Like there was some kind of brain damage. But he would, when he had to remember something, he would just connect to the etheric world, and the information would just be given to him. So he was like this. He was in this state of, divine ignorance, where, everything that he needed came from his. It's like plugging into the Ethernet, right? To where, you can see this now with modern day technology, where you used to have to remember, you used to have an internal map to drive to places, and now you just have GPS, so you don't develop that capacity. But this is something where he was plugged into the etheric, the etheric universe, the internal universe, the energetic universe, what I call the Ethernet. And he was able to just gather information. And I find it's more like that. Like I was going to give this talk, like I was going to say these things. And then last night I was up and I'm like, what was I going to say? Like if I don't do it right away, sometimes I forget about all the things I was going to say. And I woke up this morning and I was just kind of meditating, and it all came back to me. But for that period last night, I couldn't, for the world to me, remember what I wanted to talk about today. Like I couldn't remember any of it. And so it just came back. And so this idea where my, mind isn't working as well, my memory, but there's more connection to the divine universe where information can flow freely. And it's like I said, it's a lot of these things have developed just by plugging away, ticking the box, doing the meditation, doing the system, and just over years and years. And then undesirable things have faded away, and other hidden abilities have emerged, and it's just been, another way that the system has been. Like I just realized this the other day, like things that have changed. I was thinking about it's one of the reasons you're supposed to keep a diary in the system to see, how you change. You read the diary and you see how you used to be, But I was thinking about all these things, how I couldn't do those things like I used to. I couldn't have like I couldn't live, my life over again and go through all those things again. Like I just couldn't. Like they're just, I mean, those things were things I had to go through to pull out abilities and to evolve and change and grow and whatever. But I couldn't redo them. I just couldn't like tolerate those, a day in my life when I was, years and years ago. So my wife and I were watching this show, Traders, from Australia. There's 2 seasons from England, 2 seasons from America, and we've watched the Australian one. And the original show was maybe done out of New Zealand, and I don't know if that's you have to read the subtitles, but if it doesn't that if it's they're not going to speak in English, but anyways, it's a show that was based on a sort of like a game called Wolf or Werewolf or something. It used to be a party game called Werewolf. And there was werewolves and villagers, but in this game there's traders and the faithful. And some guy in Russia wanted to show people how power always wins. Having hidden knowledge, insider trading, these things, right? And so what the game is, the traders game is, like I said, used to be this game Werewolf, is that there's these group of people. So they have, usually it's like 20 people. And they pick 3 or 4 of them to be traders. And the traders meet secretly and murder somebody. They write down somebody's name on a piece of paper. And then the next day, the faithful come and try to figure out who the traders are, and they collectively murder or banish somebody, right? This is whatever you want to call it. The person's thrown out of the game. And so the traders are acting like faithful, and they're always like, oh, I'm 100% faithful. And so the first phase of the game, and this has happened, we've watched 5 seasons of this already. And it's interesting, like there's different types of people that they pick. And it's interesting to watch it from country to country. But it always goes the same way, is that the faithful have no idea how to figure out who the traders are. Like, and whatever, well, there's some, they contrive the show, whatever they do, reality TV, whatever way they edit it. But there's always the same pattern. It's kind of interesting. The faithful, they're just going around the dark, and the traders are just manipulating the shit out of the people by murdering certain people. That sends the other people into this, we don't understand who it is, like, they'll, whatever they choose. And the so-called faithful, a lot of them think they're good at it, and they're fucking totally not. Like, it's really hilarious, like that part. And they think that they're onto something, and they never are, right? And then 1 or 2 of them will pick a trader. They'll just somehow intuit that this person's a trader, or they'll be good at it. And they're of course going to be murdered. So, like, anybody who gets good at fighting the traders is murdered. And so there's like this whole dynamic. And the other part about it is the other unfair part is that they're gathering money. They're working together to do these tasks to accumulate money that's in a pot. And whoever's left at the end of the game is going to split the pot. But if there's 1 trader, they get it all. If there's 2 traders, they split the pot. So if there's 4 people and 2 of them are traders, they split the money that's left, right? And so the traders stop murdering people when there's like 4 people left, and then they have to decide whether they think there's still a trader, and they have to vote people out, right? And if there is the trader at the end, they're screwed. Like, they lose all the money, right? And so what inevitably happens is the traitors turn on each other because they want all the money for themselves. And so then they start finding traitors because traitors start stabbing each other in the back, and they know who the traitors are. And they manipulate the other people into, voting off these traitors. And then once they get a traitor, the people are like, oh my God, we're so good at this. And they have no idea that the traitors are turning on each other, when there's about 8 people left or whatever it might be. So my wife and I were watching this show in Australia. And the people were particularly dumb in this show. And one of the traitors was a guy who was, he was a hostage that was taken in Somalia. And now he's a hostage negotiator. Like, these people all have these secrets and they won't tell the other people because they know that it'll be, people will, use it against them. And like one of the things that the faithful do is they'll be like, they're totally wrong and they'll accuse somebody. It's like a witch hunt. And they'll go, you're too emotional. And that's a sign of a traitor. And then and they'll vote the person off and they won't be a traitor. The next time they'll be like, you're not emotional at all. That's a sign of a traitor. And it's like completely random who they pick, right? Like these traitors aren't people that chose to be traitors. They're randomly picked at the beginning of the game. And, but they all end up going into the dark place. And there was a young girl who was kind of a ditz. And she wasn't, she was like a model and not like young and the traitors murdered 2 traitors. And so they stabbed their fellow traitors in the back and blindsided them. And so they picked this girl to be a traitor. And like, she's, just been going through the game in a daze. No one's like worried about her. And she becomes a traitor and they pinky swear. The guy wants to do it. This guy goes, this is like a 45-year-old man goes, let's pinky swear that we'll take each other to the end of the game. And so they do some kind of Australian pinky swear where they also suck on their thumbs, right? And me and my wife are talking. It's a good show because we'll joke around about shit that's happening. And, it's funny. There's bits that are, when we make it funny. And so the very next time they vote people out, the new young girl turns on her friend, who like her best friend in the game, who's made her a traitor, and she turns on her. And the girl is voted out, and she has no idea. They totally blindside her, right? And, some of it was because of the people. The girl made a mistake. Like, she said something. She told one of the people that somebody said something on the way out. And the traitors start getting arrogant and cocky, and they start making up elaborate lies. And sometimes they get caught lying, and then they're exposed, right? And so she gets voted out, and I say to my wife, it would be great if she said, so I guess a pinky swear doesn't mean anything? Me and my wife were like hysterically like laughing about that, and we started saying it in different ways. I guess pinky swears don't carry the same weight that they used to, right? So it's a funny thing. But of all the seasons, so we're watching we're almost done with this season with Australia. But the 4 other seasons we watched, one traitor, because they stuck a knife in their fellow traitors' backs, won the money in every one of them. And the American one it's a little bit interesting because they pick up reality TV stars, where the other countries, England and Australia, just pick random people. But they have reality TV stars in America. And they're also, because they're reality TV stars, they're not as much into winning as getting more exposure and getting more screen time. So it's like that's an added element in the American version, right? But there's only been 1 season out of 4 where the faithful won. And that was because one guy brought a guy in to be a traitor, and then immediately stabbed him in the back, because the faithful have to see a traitor's gone at the end. They have to think all the traitors are gone. But the guy got pissed at him, and he said something. They're not allowed to rat out the other traitors. Like when they get voted out, if they've been stabbed in the back, they can't say, these are the other traitors. They can't do that. Like it's some kind of, a violation. I don't know what they do to the people if they did that. But this guy said, he wrote the guy's name down to vote him out. And he said, "This is my parting gift to you." And the other people realized that he was, outing the other traitor. And the guy scrambled and tried to, make up, excuses, the guy who was a traitor, but he got fucked at the end. But had that not happened, if the traitor didn't expose him, he would have walked away with the money, right? Because the traitors win every time. Because having inside information, having a little bit more power, and having the ability to, orchestrate some of the depopulation of the people and take out your rivals by murdering them without any sort of, personal exposure, you're going to win. And this is the whole point of the game. Like, this guy created this game to show people that when people had power. But it's funny how when they take a faithful person who's doing shitty at the game and not even conscious, and all of a sudden they become a traitor, and they're really good at the game. Like they suddenly have these abilities because they have now the ability to rig the game from the shadows. And how much they were like, oh, I'm always going to be a faithful, and there's this camaraderie amongst the faithful. But as soon as they become traitors, they can't wait to stab the other people in the back. Like, it's kind of great. And the way they've narrated and, they've edited these shows, like, each one's different because they're done by country, so it's kind of interesting in that way as well. So my wife and I often will fall asleep while we're watching TV, and my wife has been sleeping more, so I'll be watching something else. It's oftentimes sports. I'll watch a basketball game, but I also might watch, shows, and I might fast forward through something. I might watch a movie where I fast forward through parts that are, might not be a great movie or TV show. Sometimes it'll be foreign, something on Netflix. But I watched this TV show, Eric. Benedict Cumberbatch was his name. Whatever that actor's name is kind of a genius. He's like really smart. And he plays these characters that are, he's obnoxious and rude and, smart, but like, arrogant and complex. He's just a really great actor. But he plays a guy who's, he does puppets. And, puppets are just evil, weird, like just the whole puppet thing, right? Like, where did that come from? And, it's a deception, and it's just like the whole, he's on a kid's puppet show, and then there's, of course, like those people, the ventriloquists. It's just a weird thing. It's fucking weird, right? It's always like some kind of split personality kind of thing, which it was in this case. And, at the end of the show, spoiler alert, I'm going to say the whole thing. It's not really, I don't think, worth watching. I fast forward through a lot of disturbing stuff. But it takes place in the 70s, and this guy's the creative genius behind some sort of New York puppet show that is like Sesame Street, but like maybe a little bit better, and they're singing, and it starts off with this kid going to work with them. But then they show a meeting with the other puppeteers, and they want to change some of the format. The ratings are going down. And Cumberbatch is a real prick. He's a prick to his coworkers, and he's kind of dismissive of his son, who's a good artist. And his son comes up with a puppet named Derek that's a monster. It has horns, and, it's a blue monster that, whatever. And he said that I wonder if it could help his show, and Benedict Cumberbatch is not, having it. Like, he's just dismissive of his kid. He's mean to his wife, and he's an alcoholic. It's clear that he's an alcoholic, like in the first, so he shows him buying booze, and his kid is looking at him like, oh, he's going to get drunk again, right? This kind of thing. And so his wife and him have a really bad fight, and the kid disappears, right? And, so this whole show's about trying to get his kid back. And he ends up seeing the monster, like this guy, Eric. And he thinks that if he brings his puppet to life, his kid will see it and come back because, as the information comes across that he had an interaction with the kid, and the kid was like running away from him, right? So he feel like the kid was running away. And the kid's living in like it ends up being that the kid's living in this basement, like this area, the abandoned area of the subway in a homeless town of hundreds of people. And he followed some graffiti artist who's keeping him and is kind of taking care of him, but also wants to make some money. There's a reward because Benedict Cumberbatch's dad is a real estate developer and is offering $25,000 of 1970s money, right? And so at the end, Benedict Cumberbatch like kills this monster, and he quotes Tolstoy, who was on the show. He gets access to a microphone at like a rally, and his kid's watching in a diner because he's kind of escaped from his where he was before, and he said that everyone wants to change the world, but nobody wants to change themselves. And I don't know if that's the exact quote, but basically it. And that's from Tolstoy, right? That part was like a good ending, right? Because it's something I talk about here. You don't change the world. Everyone wants to change everybody else. Like I was covering this thing with it. I'm going to cover a little bit more of it with Aaron Rodgers and this beef that he's having, or that these guys are having with him. This guy Ryan Clark has something against Aaron Rodgers, right? And the whole vax thing, the whole everything that went with it, I talked about in these other videos, right? And Stephen A. Smith is going to threaten him. I'm going to show you that little part, and then I'll probably, hopefully, stop covering that because it sort of ran its course. But the issue you can see with Ryan Clark, and I don't know if there's brain damage because of, it doesn't need to have to be brain damage because this is how people are. People think that they can say things about other people and mask it as, you see this in the truth community, you see this on the internet, that they're telling the truth about those people. And when the same thing is done to them, they lose it. They fucking lose it, right? You see it all the time. Like, people can't handle when people treat them the way they treat other people. Like, I'm well aware, I mock people and I say things. And, if something's accurate, like if somebody says a comment to me that's accurate, and again, why would you do that? Like, I'm not asking for that, right? Like, that's, that whole thing when somebody critiques me or criticizes me and wants me to hear about it. Like, I'm not doing that to other people. Like, anybody I critique, they can find this stuff on the internet, but I'm not saying it to them. And a lot of times I'm saying things that are, they're just in general. Like, I'm talking about Trump supporters, but it's not every Trump supporter. Or I talk about Christians, but it's not every Christian, right? It's, whatever it is. I'm talking about the whole, and again, I'm not talking about the Christians themselves. I'm talking about the way the religion's been manipulated. But people get butthurt because they feel like I'm talking about them, right? The second master of the Sajmark system, Babaji, used to smoke a hookah. It was filled with tobacco, jaggery, which is unrefined sugar, and charcoal. And he'd sit there and smoke the hookah with great delight, like he was somebody who he barely ate any food, and he'd just sit there, holding court in his, his rural northern India house and compound, which was like a few houses. His dad was a lawyer, right? He was just a babu or clerk, but he inherited this house. And people would come and stay with him from different parts of India. And then like hippies from Europe and America would come there, other people. And he would sit there and work on them spiritually. Like one of the boomer hippie that started me on the system said, like, he would stare at a person, be reading their heart, like be looking at their like etheric heart. And then he'd smoke the hookah and he'd look up like at the stars or whatever. And they'd look at the person again and then smoke a little of the hookah and then look at him again and then say very lovingly, now I'm on your case, which means he was, helping them evolve spiritually. He was figuring out what they needed, reading their condition, right? And so he would sit there and he would work on these people spiritually, cleaning their hearts and transmitting to them. And, occasionally he would answer questions and talk. But every once in a while he would say something that was like corrective. But he'd look at a person and say something to that person about something people need to change, very vaguely, not addressing anyone. But he was really talking to somebody he wasn't looking at, right? And he was hoping that person would pick up and, would hear what he was saying and change their character behaviors. Like, he would read something in their character, but he wouldn't say, hey, asshole, this is what you do, and this is how you have to change it. Because, I worked as a therapist, a counselor. I have a master's degree in counseling. And you can't do that, right? Like, as easy as it would make that job, if you could just tell people shit, you can't do that. Like, because people react to it. And, it's people react to force, but also they're in complete denial. I mean, that's the whole thing. The reason there is therapy is that people are in denial about their bullshit. Like they can't see it for themselves, but they can see it in other people. And they can correct other people and shit out other people, expecting them to change, right? You see this with Ryan Clark, who, was accusing Aaron Rodgers of being a hypocrite and doing it hypocritically and lying about his whole reasons. And I cover this all the time. Like everybody on the internet's looking to change somebody else and, saying these people over here have to change or that group over there has to change. Almost nobody says, oh, I only can change myself. But I realized that in the beginning of my spiritual practice, that if I wanted to make the world a better place, which back then I did, and now yeah, maybe, I mean, the Seichmark system, Babaji had said, at the very least, don't leave the world worse than than it was before you came here. Have a zero effect. But he wasn't talking so much about environmentally or, any of the things that people think about changing the world. He was talking about one's thoughts and energy and what you are as a person. And are you dumping toxicity and crap all over the world, which most people are, like just projecting hatred and anger and, manipulation and just twisting, all the shit that people do, right? Low-level behaviors. And so, this energy emanates from you, and you're like adding to the crap that everyone else is putting out there, right? And so, I mock people here, and it sounds like I'm judging them, and I'm kind of am, but not really, because I don't care. Like it's just, I see what I see, and I just say it, and I'm not sure if it's right or whatever. And I think about this thing as all being a show, like everything that's happening outside of my small little reality, which is mostly my house and my room, right? And what I see on the computer. My window into the world is my computer, right? Like I have windows into the external area of my house and, the yard and the farm I'm at. And I go out and I interact with people occasionally, once or twice a week. And then there's my wife and my son who are here, and I interact with them, my wife the most. But in terms of seeing the world, it's just a show that I watch either on the TV or on this, this computer. And then whatever else is going on in the world. And then, being a part of some social media things where I look at occasionally, and then people leaving comments and just whatever. And so that's my, what I'm commenting on, like what I see there. But I'm not trying to change it or saying they have to change or whatever, because I don't deal in that, having, struggled with that as a counselor and in my personal life. But I realized back in 2000 and back in 1992, 93, right before I started the meditation, I realized all you can really do is change yourself. Like I had this epiphany. And then right after that, I started the Seichmark meditation, which helps a person evolve and change themselves. And, if there's a difference with what I do here, I'm not a self-improvement person. I wasn't beforehand. But I recognize that that's what my job is. Everyone's job is to evolve. Deep down in every person, there's a truth seeker. And that truth seeker might have been killed or might be suppressed right now. And with most people, they can't even deal with their lives. And if they brought truth into their lives, their lives would explode and they wouldn't have the ability to transition into a new life. Like most people have to be in denial and have to be in whatever. I mean, the first stage of anything is denial. And most people don't get out of denial. They're denying, the reality of their religion. They're denying the reality of their country. They're denying the reality of their relationships. And if they confronted if they were able to push through the denial, they would be, divorced, and they would be without a community. They would have to leave all these people behind that are more or less keeping them down. You see this with every kind of group that people are in some sort of group, and the group is keeping them. There's this shared denial. And if anybody speaks the truth, they're cast out. And so, this is what happens on a societal level. If you look at any saint or spiritual person, I mean, look at what happened to Jesus, you're Christians. Jesus said the truth, and they crucified him. So, I mean, casting out is one thing, but killing people and torturing them is a whole nother level to that, right? Like it's, when you're a truth seeker, you're a threat to the status quo. And just you finding your own truth is a threat that everyone else will follow you or copy you, but almost nobody does. And so him saying this Tolstoy quote, it's a nice sentiment, and it's kind of a, good part of the show. But the truth is bathed in changing other people, right? And so it's a complete lie. Because the other parts of the show are this. So every white guy in the show, like he says, Benedict Cumberbatch says at the end to his ex-wife who's been banging some other guy and is impregnated with his baby, and his son wants a divorce, and while they're looking for their missing son, casts him out, and he's basically living on the street, and he's hallucinating and drinking. He's an alcoholic, and he says to her, "I'm the toxic one." And then he confronts his dad, who has displaced all these homeless people and was a shitty father for him, and let his mother medicate him and all these things, right? And he says, he was scared of his father, and he realized his son was scared of him, and that these white guys are toxic, right? This toxic masculinity. And they're very big on that because all the other different demographics are represented better. And again, I'm not saying this as a white guy. I was saying this to my wife last night. When I was a kid, the white guy was always the hero. The women were were adoring the hero. Well, the white women were adoring the hero. And people of color, the Native Americans and, the Russians or the terrorists or, black people or whatever it was, they were always the villain, right? They were portrayed negatively, cast in a villainous light, and the white guy was cast in a heroic light. And I saw this as a kid, and I thought it was bullshit, right? Like I would watch the movies, the westerns, and I'd root for the Indians. And I had some past life association with Native Americans. I just had this kind of personality where I, didn't buy into the propaganda, and, I saw through it. And you could see that they were, this was the point of view of America, and they were celebrating a certain type of person, a white guy, but a certain kind of white guy. Not a low-life type of trailer trash white guy, which was, this educated sort of Harvard, doctors. Think about how doctors were always given this hero narrative. And we know doctors are, just evil, like in lots of different ways. The ones that aren't healers, because the system is, it's for-profit medicine, and the doctors are, icky, which, I'm covering my other video. I don't want to get into that here. But in this TV show, there is a gay cop, and he's with an older white guy who's dying of AIDS. And I fast forward for a lot of their bullshit, right? Because there's a lot of things you could tell where they were going with it. I just didn't want to see it. And there is a club that the kid, like a nightclub where the kid walked by. And the nightclub has a couple of drag queens that are like the bouncers. And inside the club, it's kind of hedonistic and very sexual, and there's a lot of gay activity, and there's human trafficking, and there's a lot of these, young boys who are being sexualized. The one maybe positive thing to the show is it really, I thought, because it was, a well done show in the sense that it was acted and produced well. It was one of the better made shows, but it was full of all this. It was so preachy and filled with all these, pushing all this woke agenda bullshit, right? But I thought about the human trafficking aspect of it. And you think that to understand there are people out there who engage in human trafficking. Either they avail themselves of prostitutes. I had a friend when I was in college, and we were drunk. He was an old, some guy who played on my basketball team, an older guy. And he was, probably close to his 30s. And we were he was on my, we had a YMCA basketball team. And, a bunch of us were out drinking, and then he was maybe driving me home. And he was at the end of the night, he's like, let's go find some prostitutes. And I'm like, no thanks. My brother was into prostitutes when he was in Vietnam. And, I don't understand it. I don't understand how that, paying for sex would be something, it's just not in my system. I have no interest in it. And it would not be something where that would arouse me or something where I would, and I don't know why people like that, right? And there's just a kind of, there's a dirtiness to it as well, right? And, the fact that this person doesn't care about you, doesn't like you, there's no relationship there. I had like a few one night stands in my existence, really only kind of one. And I didn't like it. And it was like, it just wasn't who I was. Like, it was just something where, I wasn't into that. Like, I made and I wasn't a good person. It wasn't because I, like, was this great, choir boy. Like, but there's certain things that I just didn't, appeal to me. And I realized when I was, in my early 20s, that if you're going to have sex with somebody, you better be ready to marry them because of the possibility of getting pregnant. No matter what you do with birth control or not, there's always this possibility. And you shouldn't date anybody. This is my thought. I shouldn't, this is how I figured it out. Date anybody you weren't on the path towards marriage, regardless of whatever the social norms are. Because, you're engaging in a behavior which could lead to a kid. And then you're stuck with that person for 18 years, amongst other things. Like, that's just one reason. And, my friends would want to go to strip clubs, and I just doesn't, my brother wanted me to get a job there, like when I was in Atlanta, and he had contacts with people. One at this place, the Gold Club, another place was a skanky place. I've talked about this in some of my other, videos. And the stuff just, it was icky for me. Like, I just felt very uncomfortable in these places, right? When my friends wanted to go to a strip club or whatever it was. Like, there was just a grossness to it. They have, food. It's like women walking around naked. They have, some buffet or something. It's just the whole place is just icky. And prostitutes, there's just something, you're involved in human trafficking if you're involved with prostitutes. And they're usually, these women are like slaves off into pimps and the whole thing, right? But then there are people who actually deal in human trafficking, and they take kids off the street and turn them into whatever it is, right? And I was thinking about all the fucked up people I've known over the years. Now, of course, some of the kids I worked in these treatment centers that were sexual offenders, and they were, abused, and they were part of the system. Maybe as they grew up, they would do this. But I don't know anybody who would human traffic. In fact, some of the kids that were in these treatment centers, one of the kids, there was two little boys, and he was the older brother. And their parents trafficked them. They pimped out their own kids. That was, But I never met them. But I knew of them. But other than that, I don't know anybody that would deal in slavery, right? Not even close. I can't. Maybe I did, and it's something I didn't know about them. But I can't imagine I've ever met somebody that would do that. But there's lots of people that do that. And I was just thinking about that, dealing in other people, especially young kids, and taking kids out of their homes or runaway kids, and then turning them into your property. There's over 28 million slaves. The whole slave thing that used to be a normal thing in cultures all across the globe. But people still have the desire to do that, and there's different forms of slavery and exploiting other people. But there's lots of people that are in one way or another participating in it passively without their knowledge. They're participating in human trafficking, right? Even in terms of illegal immigration and things. And these ways that people are paid less than you're paying somebody less than hiring a citizen of your country. But there's things in our system that are forms of human trafficking that we're not even aware of, and we turn a blind eye to, right? Because the thing I said about denial. So, in terms of that, the show, the two good parts was him talking about everyone wants to change the world, but no one wants to change themselves and changing. And the other thing was just the realistic idea of human trafficking and how icky it is. If you think about it, right? How gross that is. But the rest of it is so preachy. So you had this gay cop, and he was hiding the fact that he was gay. And his boss and all these other people were talking about, the F word for derogatory term for gay men, right? And at one point he had a picture of some of the other cops posted, put an envelope and put it on a bulletin board next to his, where his desk was, with his name written on it. And it showed him with his gay lover, and it said the F word on it, right? And so, they were trying to show you how bad it was for homosexuals in the 70s and how bad this guy was being mistreated. But there was a black woman who also lost her kid some years ago, and she didn't get the kind of police support that this white family was getting. So that was another sub-narrative. And, these things exist, right? There's prejudice, and there is privilege in these things, the stuff that people on the right try to deny. There's, there is white privilege or whatever it's not what they think it is or call it in the liberal woke media, but there is certain benefits you have to being a white person in this society. And again, it's not all white people. There's plenty of trailer trash type people who are living in, in poverty that are disrespected. I mean, there's lots of poor white people they're suffering, but there is some element of prejudice built in the system. There is this idea that people of color are less evolved. Like that's, where the idea of slavery was that these people were, like less evolved. They weren't on the level of white people, and therefore they could be taken as slaves. And that idea still persists to some extent. And there is prejudice against gay people and all the things that's out there. But when I grew up, the idea was, it wasn't necessarily said out and out, and it was said in a more subtle way at times, and sometimes there were people who would just say it, that white people were superior. And, that was reflective in the content, the movie content, and these other people were lesser, like, like a subspecies or not as, depending on the people was, like whatever it was. That heterosexual white people were better and that these other people were less than. And that was the message we got. That was the indoctrination we got. But now the message is that men in general have toxic masculinity, white men particularly, and that they're the bad guys and all the evil in the world is because of them and their system they created. And they should be demonized. And it's the same fucking behavior, right? You've just changed the demographics. And, you can't do that. Because if you're saying that this way is bad, then you get rid of all this idea that one group is the problem and the other group are the heroes and these are the villains. And this TV show is so preachy in that way. Like, it's just across the board. And it talks about the homeless, being, there's the white male toxic masculinity and how it affects the homeless, how it affects women, how it affects children, how it affects gays, how it affects the homeless and, all these other demographics. Like, all the white guys are the bad guys, the murderers, the bullies. But going back to this game, the traitors, you see when people get power, if you give the power to a different demographic, maybe it's a little bit different, but they still do the same bullshit and have done this throughout history. I mean, there are some great civilizations out there where people are cooperative and they're living in a tribal situation and there's love and, simplicity and innocence, and that does exist. But the people that aspire to power, regardless of their race or their sexual orientation or their gender, whatever it is, right? When they get power, it does a certain thing to them, and they fucking suck. They just end up sucking, right? And you can see it because people aren't trying to evolve and change themselves, and everyone wants to bend the world to their will, the way they see it. And they want to support the people that they identify with in their demographics. And that's always been the problem with humanity, that no one really wants to change themselves, right? No one really wants to make the world a better place if it means that they have to confront their own bullshit. People just don't like to do it. I've noticed this for years, and, I've given up on it, long ago, changing other people. I have no interest in it. The people do benefit from whatever I do here, and that's, that's because of them. They're, they're good or special. They're looking to change themselves, right? The people are looking to evolve and change themselves, which is not that many people, and it's only to whatever degree they're willing to confront their own bullshit, right? But when you meditate and you look at yourself, I'm very aware, if I'm lying. There's lies that people tell that, they're not really conscious that they're telling lies, right? They have an agenda, and they're just trained to lie to other people about that agenda because they don't think they'll be successful if they tell people the truth. Like this Trader Show is a good example of that, right? Where lying is built into the game, like the structure, the social structure. Lying is built into the social structure, and people lie all the time, right? And are expected to lie. Just socially, you're expected to lie to people. Like sometimes people ask you a manipulative, question. Like your girlfriend or wife saying, "Is my ass fat?" Like that's manipulative, right? Because there's no truthful answer to that, right? Like you could say, well, for you particularly, no, I think it looks great. Like I like the way it looks, right? If that's true, then yeah, that's great. But every other answer is going to be bullshit, or it's going to be considered socially offensive, right? And so, like and that's just a kind of a grosser example of this. But within the structure of any kind of social situation, there are things that you're expected to lie about at your job, to your family, and then when you start telling the truth, you're considered a bad person. Like like if you told the truth all the time, I mean, you could learn to do it in more subtle ways. You don't have to be brutally honest, right? But even in that, like in people, there's so much that in our society is built on collective agreement to lie. Santa Claus and Elf on a Shelf, those are examples of this. All these things you're just expected to lie about. And if you think about it, you go through life and you're conditioned to do this. It becomes automatic and you don't even confront it. But when you start to meditate and you start being a truth seeker and you start looking at yourself going, oh yeah, I'm being manipulative right now. Like I'm saying one thing, but it's not the truth, and I'm saying it to, better my own situation by manipulating others. And people do it all the time. And when you do it personally and you're not aware of it, like then you have to start becoming aware of it. Like behaviors, at least being aware of it. Like don't lie to yourself about it, right? And then, you can start thinking about changing the way that you do things. Think the way you think about things. Like when you have an interaction and you process something in a way that's deceptive, right? Like somebody tells you the truth and it stings. Like people leave me shitty comments. They hear something that they need to hear from me. And it's a sense, it's coming from God, not like, through me, but I'm just the vessel. And they hear something that could, if they were able to do it the right way and confront it, they could change and be a better person. And I'm not directing it at them personally, it's coming through me. And what I say is true. And on a level, some level they know it's true. But then they start manipulating the interaction, and they fantasize that I'm some sort of a horrible person, and they have to lash out against me, either in their minds or in a comment or both. I mean, certainly in their minds, no matter what, and make me the bad guy. Because I told them something that they know to be true, but they can't deal with it, right? And this is happening all over the place, where people hear truth that stings and would help them if they could really say, yeah, that's true. And the way that my internal world works, and a lot of it has to do with the Sizemore system, but some of it's just how I am as a person, that there isn't like things that people could say about me that would blindside me, right? Like I'm aware, like how I affect other people. Like some of my, negative qualities, I know why people don't like me. Like, if they told me truthfully and they were honest and they could see things in me, not things that they made up to make a character, like put things on me that I don't have, but see real things that are in me and real tendencies that I have. And they say, you do this and you do that. Almost never do I get a comment where somebody really nails it. And I'm like, I know worse things about myself, or I know the bad things about myself, and you're not even aware of them. Like you're just reacting to your own, your own butthurtness, right? That's the majority of negative comments. But let's say somebody really said something that was truthful about me. I'd be like, yeah, that's true. Like I'm not, like I'm not going to be blindsided. Like there's lots of imperfections in what I am and what I do. Like how I perform what I do, and like I make the same mistakes, and I've tried to alleviate some of those mistakes, and I'm sometimes sloppy with things or whatever. Just I've tried to alleviate some of those mistakes, in my my life or whatever. When I'm cooking, like I end up with like a ton of shit on the floor, and like when I'm really working at that, like sometimes I'm just in a rush, or I'm busy, and I just gotta do it the way I do it. But I look down on the floor, I'm like, holy fuck, right? When I eat food, like I get shit on my like shirt all the time, and if I could, sometimes I'll work to be more careful about what I'm doing, more mindful. But it takes a lot of energy and effort for me to be like not sloppy. Like it does. Like it's it's an added burden, and sometimes I just don't have that in me. But I'm aware it's not great. Like it's like as I'm leaving a mess, and of course I can sweep and clean it up, but there's all that stuff, right? And I can see where it bothers other people who are more meticulous and more, like would be a good person to be for people with OCD, for example, right? It's not a good combination. But I have all these other things that are just there, right? And if people said those things, they can say it in a way like to make me less than. I mean, people can always, be dicks about it and add their little evil, little judgmental piece of shit kind of, you're a piece of shit kind of thing, right? And so that's not cool. But if people just said, you do these things, I'd be like, yeah, I do them. Or, yeah, this is my tendencies, right? But most people can't do that because they don't want to look at it and they think of themselves as perfect. And they somehow think that they're just better than everyone else. And so, it really exists in the truth community. Because people get really arrogant when they think that they're awake and everyone else is sheeple. And they see it and you just fucking don't. And oftentimes they're on the most remedial level of being a truther. They're not even really truth seekers. And yet they're lording over people. Like people use the Bible as a weapon because they think they're going to heaven and you're going to hell, and they lord that over you like some kind of divine knowledge, and they're just worthless piece of shit that don't have any relationship with God whatsoever. And like Jesus would want no part of them. Like Jesus, like, please don't use my fucking name anymore, bro. Like you suck. Like don't even, you're not with me. Like you pretend you are, but you're just using me as a weapon, right? And so you see this existence where this time in our history where almost everybody's in denial and is violent about, is aggressive about keeping that denial in place as individuals and a collective. And so changing other people, it doesn't really exist. And forcing other people, force feeding your views by putting it in a manipulative movie or TV show like people are doing now with all this feminist and woke agenda doesn't work, right? That's why Trump is president right now. I mean, at least in terms of any organic legitimacy to the elections, it's because people resist force. And so the only thing that'll ever save humanity is when people embrace their personal spiritual evolution and realize that they're full of shit and they need to change that, right? Like, everyone has to deal with their own part of them that's a piece of shit. I've talked about this extensively in my Journey series and things. And, and people just don't want to do that. All right, my voice is starting to go here, but I just, felt this was a necessary introduction. Let's get into the other stuff here. So keeping with the theme of denial, Stephen A. Smith, I showed you part of this video in the first time I covered this, right? And I didn't see the end of it, but I've been getting stuff from this guy, Jason Whitlock, who has a beef with Stephen A. Smith. So, like, he had showed this clip on his show. The end of this, like, I didn't watch the whole thing because it was the same old bullshit from this guy, right? But he kind of threatens Aaron Rodgers in a goofy, limp dick kind of way here.
Many others who would do that. There are paid appearances in our business all the time. That was not a shot at Pat McAfee. It was a shot at Aaron Rodgers.
Okay, so why? Why was a shot at Aaron Rodgers? So let's get into the thread here.
It was Ryan Clark saying, you got to be paid to go on with your boy. Other people didn't charge me.
Okay, so this was 100% not factual. Because what Pat McAfee went on to say, and I listened to the rest of his, when Aaron Rodgers was saying the thing about state your vax status, Pat McAfee made it clear that he paid all of his people. When he got a $500 million contract from ESPN, he took care of all of his people. And he had already said this earlier. And Aaron Rodgers was one of the big reasons his show blew up. Because Aaron Rodgers came by every Tuesday, and it was when the vax shit was going on. And there's so many people who are anti-vax and were supportive of Aaron Rodgers, and they wanted to hear his side of the story, that, they started tuning into Pat McAfee because of that. And then all the drama that unfolded that was brought about by other people, not Aaron Rodgers, right? And so he said after he got this big payday, he went and gave Aaron Rodgers money, and Aaron Rodgers didn't want to take it, but Pat McAfee said, you helped make this show. Like you being on this show changed the trajectory of the show, and he gave him whatever amount of money he gave him, right? And then Aaron Rodgers, and they said now Aaron Rodgers isn't taking any money from him. And he's just showing up anyway. So that is disingenuous. And to criticize Aaron Rodgers for taking money, when these guys are about the money, right? Stephen A. Smith said that he was vax hesitant, but he got it because he didn't want to give up his money, right? So that's how much his money meant to him. Where Kyrie Irving, who was a much better person and was stood by not only, Kyrie Irving said he did it in part because he wanted to stand up for other people who couldn't stand up for themselves, who were suffering the same kind of pressure from their place of work to get the vax, right? And so, that whole, thing that played out there was Kyrie Irving being a bigger man who gave up $90 million. Like, Kyrie Irving is the pinnacle of this thing. Whether it's stage, whether it's a scripted part that he's playing, he is, this is just all part of the show, which I always say, sure. But in the show, Kyrie Irving is the best guy in terms of all this, because whether you believe in vaxxes or not, he gave up a boatload of money to stand up for something he believed in, and turned out to be, more and more right as time has gone on, right? Which Stephen A. Smith admitted, right? So that is completely false what he just said. That the shot that Ryan Clark fired at Aaron Rodgers for taking money, and that people interviewed with him and didn't take any money. These are, Pat McAfee's show was built in part by Aaron Rodgers, and Aaron Rodgers did all that shit for free. He showed up every Tuesday for free. And in retrospect, after Pat McAfee's show blew up, and Ryan Clark's show isn't going to blow up, right? He's going to get nothing. He's got nothing. Like, I didn't even know he had a show. Like his own show, right? He's trying to do the same shit that Pat McAfee's doing, but his show sucks because he's like whatever he is. He's just remedial in this area. Where Aaron Rodgers is, embracing some kind of a different level of consciousness.
That's not talking about Pat McAfee. That's talking about Aaron Rodgers. So I think it's something that needed to be said. In the end, it comes back to what I've said about Aaron Rodgers on many times. My man, ball and win. Because the reality is you haven't won as great as you are. You haven't won a Super Bowl since 2010. You haven't been to the Super Bowl since 2010. And now your career is going in the wrong direction based on wins and losses. They want you, dial it back, roll it back to next year with you and Devontae Adams. Here all next season and beyond. Do something about it, bro. Show us.
Okay, so, this is the problem with this dynamic. This is the culture of this, whatever they do here. This sports commentator first take where these guys have a take. They have this situation where they have to come up with content, and it has to be controversial, and it has to move the needle. And so someone's going to be a winner and someone's going to be a loser. And your career trajectory is, Aaron Rodgers is, again, I'm not an Aaron Rodgers fan. I wasn't an Aaron Rodgers fan. I wasn't really a Green Bay Packers fan. But I understand the Green Bay Packers as an excellent organization. They've always had, they won the first 2 Super Bowls, and it's a small market. Like it's, I have some connection to that area, Wisconsin. And it's not a huge city. It's one of the smaller cities, and yet they regularly kick Chicago's ass. And Chicago used to have a great franchise, back in the day before the Super Bowls. Chicago and Green Bay had more championships. There used to be NFL championship before the Super Bowl. And then, the Green Bay Packers won the first 2 Super Bowls. And they've been consistently in the playoffs. And other small market teams, the Pittsburgh Steelers, this complaint that this guy in my last video that Jeremy Piven gave, that he wanted to see the Jets and the Bears. The Jets and the Bears have done more to wreck players and young quarterbacks than any other franchises. I mean, there's just some bad franchises out there. And you can see it starts with the owner, but it also, there's coaches and a general manager, and they bring about a winning culture. And there's these teams like the Packers and the Steelers, which Aaron Rodgers and Ryan Clark were a part of. They had an advantage just there. Like you talk about privilege, like white privilege, but in terms of football, there's a privilege to playing for some of these winning franchises. And these franchises, the Pittsburgh Steelers hasn't had a losing record in forever, right? And so they haven't won Super Bowls, but Aaron Rodgers was a winning quarterback on a winning franchise. He went to the Jets, where the Jets have 2 quarterbacks now that are, one guy's playing for the Vikings and the other guy's playing for the Seahawks. Geno Smith is playing for the Seahawks. Geno Smith was almost out of the league, and he was one of the high-pick draft picks for the Jets years ago. And the other guy, Sam Darnold, who blew out from the Jets a while back. Remember, he was the guy that he was playing the Patriots and he was seeing ghosts, right? Like you said, the Bill Belichick defense was making him see ghosts. Like he thinks that he thought defenders were places they weren't because he was so like mind fucked by Bill Belichick's defense. The guy's now in a great organization, the Vikings, with a great quarterback, a coach, a coach that's great for quarterbacks. And so the place that you're in, Aaron Rodgers then gets hurt. They have the whole, the the hard knocks thing that happened. They were in this situation, and they had another young quarterback where they were, that they wrecked a second round. He was the second pick in the draft, whatever that guy's name was. Can't even remember. And so the Jets and the Chicago Bears have wrecked all these young quarterbacks. The Bears are wrecking a quarterback right now. And so Aaron Rodgers came in trying to, to bring a winning culture to this organization. And his Achilles gets blown out and he's old. Like he's not as good as he was, doesn't recover, and the franchise tanks, right? And they go off on Aaron Rodgers because of his personal stuff, because of some of his controversial views. And it started with the vax, right? And so they all went after him because of that. And his play sucks, like he's not playing well, but a big part of it's organizational, and a big part of it is he's gotten old. But these guys just demonize people. I'll show you the Giannis clip in a second. Let's listen to the end of this thing.
That's what you got left. Going after Ryan Clark, that ain't going to do much for you. That ain't going to do much for you.
Okay, so these guys all fired first. Ryan Clark said about Aaron Rodgers, he's a bad leader, and a bunch of bullshit, which I already showed you. He was been telling this story about how Aaron Rodgers offended him. Ryan Clark's a shit talker. He talks shit, and he was arrogant, and he's a prick. And, he does these same behaviors. So Aaron Rodgers, was talking shit to him, which Ryan Clark does. And Ryan Clark has held a grudge and wanted to physically hurt him, right? They said they want to break his fingers. And, because of whatever issues he has as a person, whether he's got brain damage or he's just a prick, whatever it is. And so it's, again, I say this all the time. If you're against a behavior, then don't do the behavior. But when somebody does the behavior to somebody like you or somebody else that you like, what I was used to mock people, and I mocked Britney Spears, and I had all these Britney Spears, oh, she's been abused, and why aren't you compassionate? Why are you a horrible person? I'm like, okay, did you say anything when I was mocking Lady Gaga? No, because you hate Lady Gaga. So it's the same behavior, right? And I say this all the time. I'm aware of it in myself and then everybody else. Don't complain about behaviors that you do, right? When they end up being done to you or something that you value or you like, right? Like if you're not against the behavior, then you're against it in all forms. And so this is where he gets into the threatening part. But remember that Aaron Rodgers said nothing about any of these guys. He didn't mention them by name. And Ryan Clark took it on himself to not just talk about Aaron Rodgers' poor play on the field, which Aaron Rodgers was acknowledging he wasn't playing well. Like he knew it. That's whatever that is. He called him a bad leader and other things like toxic in a locker room, even though he'd been a part of a winning organization. And Ryan Clark said it himself that when they were playing in the Super Bowl, they were hoping that they would play against the Chicago Bears and whatever that Jay Cutler guy, that old quarterback, he became a reality TV star with some skank, one of those skank shows, right? And he was hoping not to play against Aaron Rodgers because that's how great he was, right? And so he must have had something in terms of his ability to participate in a winning locker room. Like, all the things that they said that they're critical of him, he has to have something going on, right? But my defense of Aaron Rodgers comes only because of his, the way he dealt and the way they did him because of the vax. The same thing with Kyrie Irving. I wasn't a fan of either one of them. Kyrie Irving they're both great players. I admired what they could do on the football field and the basketball court. Kyrie Irving, the stuff he does is incredible. I wasn't against him. I'm more of a Steph Curry fan. But Kyrie Irving, because of his stance, like he went up from somebody that, I was neutral on to somebody who, to me is like, in terms of what's available in this show, he's a real hero. Because he gave up as much as $90 million to take a stand on something. And then a couple of things, right? And so, this bullshit that they're saying here, that Aaron Rodgers picked the fight, Aaron Rodgers only said something about their industry
And these players who become stars and feel the need to shit on other players and disrespect the locker room and, unfairly criticize people's characters and the people they are just to have hot takes and so that they can, make a lot of money in this, this kind of media climate, right? That's all Aaron Rodgers said. Very, like he didn't target anybody. But Ryan Clark took it on himself to get personally butthurt and whine and complain and then attack Aaron Rodgers, who he's had a personal vendetta against since Aaron Rodgers beat him in the Super Bowl because he's a sore loser, and he's a baby, right?
Ryan Clark and I have gone at each other in the past. You don't have a platform every day like I do. You don't want to go at Ryan Clark.
This is this failed threat. This guy, first of all, this is, again, this total denial. Because you don't have any power. Like this idea of having a platform, only people who are afraid of criticism, which Aaron Rodgers clearly doesn't listen to this bullshit. He doesn't care about it. Like he's not, like, you can tell he doesn't care about it. All of us have to deal with this that are on the internet. Like all of us, whatever level you're on. You have to deal with people being sucky to you and going after you and hating upon you. You're going to have haters. And if you're going to say anything that's going to be controversial, you're going to get a lot of butthurt, emotionally stunted, denial-based people. There's the whole denial thing that are going to attack you because they can't deal with their own bullshit, right? And when you realize that, you know that their opinions mean nothing. These are like walking zombies and ghouls. Stephen A. Smith's audience, he doesn't have a lot of great truthers and people who are elevated in their consciousness, spiritual people, watching his bullshit, right? Because it's remedial. It's a waste of time. But they also they owe their audience something, and they're lying to their audience, right? They're misrepresenting things to their audience more than they are, Aaron Rodgers and these other things. And they're keeping their audience. Plus, they now are, they're part of the gambling industry, ESPN, and they have their own bullshit that they do gambling lines, and he makes money off ESPN gambling lines. And so that's also a part of it. And these people who watch these shows expecting to get an edge, they disrespect these people, or they encourage these people to, indulge in their gambling addiction. But for the most part, these are limp dick shows, and because people don't want to change, and people want to hate Aaron Rodgers are going to hate Aaron Rodgers. People are going to like him. And Stephen A. Smith has zero pull, right? Only in the sports world by people who listen to what he says about them personally and get offended. And I would be upset if he shit on somebody every day or every time. Like he say he's threatening to shit on Aaron Rodgers. But if he thinks he has so much power and influence, then he should get down on his fucking knees and beg Kyrie Irving for forgiveness for the bullshit he did to him, right? Because he has admitted that he was personal with Kyrie Irving's dad. And when these guys carry out their personal vendettas and they slander people, which he's threatening. He's saying, Aaron, if you keep on talking shit to this guy, we're going to keep on slamming you on our platforms. This is the threat. This is this limp dick, this guy who's trying to be arrogant and like, a little fucking man sitting on a toilet of a throne, right, thinking he's a king.
That is not a winnable situation for you, Aaron Rodgers. In fact, it's almost as bad of a situation as it has been you going out on the field on Sundays in the Jets uniform. You might want to think about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Look like a sad little man, right? Like, a lot of these guys are frustrated athletes that sucked, and they're jealous of the athletes that succeed. A lot of these sports writers, it's been a thing, right? They're guys who wanted to play sports, they couldn't, so they wanted to be a part of it, so they do this, and they become critics. Like, food critics are often people who, wanted to be restaurateurs or wanted to be chefs, and they can't do it. Movie critics are people who wanted to make films but couldn't do it, so they these things, right? Like, they don't give honest critiques because they're not telling you, the bitterness that's inside of them, the failure of being able to do, and with the jealousy that's there, and all this denial that I'm talking about, right?
Just friendly words of advice.
Just friendly words of advice. Just friendly words of advice. Okay, so this was kind of a funny thing. This guy, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Antetokounmpo, shit, I usually can pronounce it, who plays for the Milwaukee Bucks. He's known as the Greek freak, right? I covered him a little bit with Trump when Trump said he wasn't Greek, right? But he had this to say about the media.
Media works. The day you beat a team, like today, Vegas, baby, the Bucks are rolling. They're going to Vegas. Blackjack. Wow. Wow. And the day you lose, they suck. They get him out of here. Trade Giannis, and he has blood in his hands, and nobody wants him, and he can shoot and lick and blah blah blah. Bad team at 0 IQ. I'm like, guys, yesterday I was the best player in the world. Because this.
That's his brother. He's brought his brothers to play on various teams, and his brothers now is traveling with the team. And, this is an accurate display. This is an accurate cycle of what happens in the media. Because Giannis won the championship a couple of years ago. He was considered one of the top 2 or 3 players. He's having an MVP season this year. And they teamed him with Damian Lillard last year. And they traded a guy, a good guard, whatever his name is. I can't think of it offhand. But to the Boston Celtics. And the Boston Celtics won. Drew Holiday. And Drew Holiday is a great defender, and Dame Lillard isn't. So it looked like they made the bad move, and it was based in Giannis kind of pushed for some changes. And so they blamed him for their shitty year last year, and they got off to a horrible start. And they were saying he should be traded. Like he's a once-in-a-generational talent. Like they call him the freak, right? Because he's, 7 feet tall, and he's got, athletic ability that, you just don't normally see. And this is not about basketball. This is about the media. And so they said he should be traded, and who could he be traded? And they were talking about trades. Milwaukee Bucks aren't going to fucking trade him. Milwaukee Bucks, it's a small market team, and they've lucked into a generational talent, and they already won a championship. But then they got their shit together. They started to win, and now they're talking about, well, they just won the NBA Cup, and they might have a chance of being in the finals this year. They're certainly going to do well in the playoffs unless they have a disaster. And so, the media pundits, when you're winning, you're the greatest person in the world. Unless they find some kind of other story that they can, whatever. But then as soon as you lose, they start throwing you under the bus. And, this is why they're losers. Because, these winning traditions, these winning cities, they ride through the bad times. And they believe in their system. And they don't panic. And they don't fire their coach every fucking 10 minutes. And they don't, they build a system. They believe in the system. You see this guy, Dan Campbell, for the Detroit Lions. People who are successful know that there's going to be down times, and they have to have faith in their system and what they're doing. In my spiritual practice, I know there's shit times, right? In fact, more than anything else. And you have to just get through those times. Like you're going to get depressed, you're going to feel bad. And so the media people don't do that because they're not concerned about winning or losing. They want a devil. They want somebody to demonize. And for this particular, controversy, it's Aaron Rodgers. But what they're doing is just they're screwing their audience over who is spending way too much time thinking about sports. That is just kind of a remedial thing. It's a kid's game, right? I mean, the amount of energy and time and money and the betting on top of it and the gambling addiction and then all the seedy businesses that go around it, all the money that's involved and the amount of effort that an athlete and, teams have to put into winning. It has to be they have to neglect their families and spend all their time just focused on winning because, everything they eat, everything they do, the way they train, everything in their life has to be pointed at this one goal because the competition is so heated because there's way too much emphasis on basically games that are more or less for kids. When you're in your 30s, it's time to move on to something else. But, that's not professional sports. It's an obsession. And it's, distraction, right? From people, in denial who can't deal with their own issues and their own life issues. So they look forward to this social event they have every Sunday. I work with a guy who called his football session his church. He was going to church when he was going to games, and he was a Cleveland Browns fan, and he was part of a fantasy football league and all that bullshit, right? There's no value in it. It's just a waste of time. it can be entertaining. I watch it to whatever extent. I cover it here. But it's just, there's nothing here, right? There's nothing of importance. Like, it can be a metaphor for life, and you can learn things. Playing sports is great. Learning to master, there's some level of self-mastery and, these things when you're a young person. It's great to build your physical body up. I mean, there's wonderful things about sports. But, at some level, it's just sports, right? Like, it's capped off. Like, it's not the end all. It's not the goal. Okay, so let's go back to this dude.
To respond. And, he addressed me during that PSA on Pat McAfee. He never used my name, but he mentioned, obviously, the lapel pin with my initials. And
he wears a lapel pin he's had handcrafted with his initials on it. Right, which is arrogant. Like, there's an arrogance here, right? All these guys are arrogant because they're professional athletes. And you have to be arrogant. You have to have an edge. You have to have a competitive spirit. You have to be egotistical. It just breeds that. You have to. The competition, you have to want to win. You have to have drive. You have to be, an A-type personality, right? These are just parts of it, which is, there are people like that, right? And those people are accomplishment-oriented. People who have to accomplish things. And without those people, society wouldn't move forward. Without people with lots of ambition. So I don't, but it has to be balanced out. And humility as you get older has to come in, right? And there's a lack of humility here because he's wearing a pin which is initials on it. Like, what the fuck, right? And, it was only after this guy, Aaron Rodgers didn't say shit to either one of them. He didn't say shit to any of these people personally. He criticized them for wanting to be stars and throwing people under the bus to do it and disrespecting sort of the sanctity of the locker room and the brotherhood of these athletes who all struggle in these win, the people who win and lose, and making it personal. Like, you can criticize their football playing, but this guy said Aaron Rodgers was a fraud and a bad leader because he has a personal grudge, which he's not willing to admit now because he's a piece of shit, right? Because he's in complete denial of his own bullshit, right?
I think the part that rubbed me in a way where I felt like I had to respond was the whole vaccination thing. Because I feel like he uses that to get those people who are of like mind when it comes to whether it's vaccination, partisanship, whatever that is, to try to ignore the facts. The
See, this is the thing, right? But you guys can't, this is, they both talk about the oppression of black people, right? Stephen A. Smith is not a big guy on that because he likes a wider audience, a bigger audience. But they both talk about that, and they're aware of that, right? And in terms of their political focus, right? BLM and these type of things. And so, if you're against the demonization of a people, but you guys went in on the vax stuff partially because of your personal situation where you had to get it, and partially because of your corporate interest and whatever your belief system is. And this guy fully believes in the medical system because he allowed them to remove his gallbladder and his spleen. Now, whatever happened to him in a football injury that's fucked up where they take out your spleen. Your spleen is, where your reserve blood flow is, right? Like you have and I'm not sure all that much about the spleen other than mine was swollen when I had mono. But if they take something out like that, your tonsils and your gallbladder, they do things in your body and you're fucked in certain ways, right? It's just bad for you. But they do it, and I'm not advising people what to do, but that's where allopathic medicine suffers. But this guy believes in allopathic medicine. But the people who came out as they didn't get the vax were demonized, and we know it. It's like you have to be on the other side of that or put yourself on the other side to see how these people were treated, particularly Kyrie Irving. And you guys jumped on him because of that. And you can say, well, it's because he lied, but it's bullshit. Because it was Pfizer, your sponsors and your handlers were a part of that, right? And, when you go after him, and for you it's personal. Like, you're not admitting that it's personal, that you have a personal beef with Aaron Rodgers. And this guy had a personal beef with Kyrie Irving and Kyrie Irving's dad. And you used your platform to turn your audience and to slander the guys or whatever. I don't know if slander is the right word, but whatever you guys are doing there. in a disingenuous way. And that's the whole thing. That's why I'm covering this. You're denying your behaviors. You're minimizing your behaviors or denying them completely, and you're calling other people hypocrites, right?
Facts were that what he said was hypocritical. The facts were that he has an issue with people talking about his play in a negative way when that's what the film is telling us.
He didn't say about the play. He was saying about personal shit that people were saying. Because Pat McAfee in that show analyzes the, football content and play of people. And when you can say people played poorly, that's going to be a fact. You're going to see it, like just in the stats themselves. He never once said it was about the play. He said that you guys were talking shit about people and criticizing their characters and who they were. Not, you saying they weren't leaders or whatever. He is obviously old. He is obviously suffering from returning from Achilles injury and these other things. He never once said it was about his play. You just made that up, and you're disrespecting your audience because you're in denial of your own bullshit. So you have to make up lies and a narrative that isn't true and rearrange the facts, like you said, facts, right? The facts where he never once said anything about criticizing his play. There was never any of that. And you didn't criticize his play. I mean, you did, but you made it personal. You said he wasn't a good leader, and he was a cancer in the locker room because you had talked to some anonymous sources in there because you had a personal vendetta against the guy. Like, be fucking honest, right? Like, this is the thing about if you're going to be out in this world of social media, then, you're going to get called on your bullshit, right? You're calling Aaron Rodgers on his bullshit, then you better be, clear in your truth. But these guys particularly, these two guys, but these, sports pundits in general, Stephen A. Smith's like this, they think by winning an argument, Donald Trump's a person like this, right? They think by winning an argument forcefully or any other way, you makes you right. And having a platform, having a louder voice, or being able to, lawyer the details in some way to form a narrative that is false. But you're like Stephen A. Smith was threatening to, go after Aaron Rodgers on a platform. You don't have a platform, but we do, and we'll go after you. Well, why don't you go after him now then? Like, you're only going after him, what, because of personal vendetta and these little bitchy little beef things you're doing, right? Like, this isn't, you go after the guy if, you'd give him a break like Trump would give Hillary Clinton a break, because as long as he doesn't go after you, but if he goes after you, you guys are going to have to go back at him. Like, if you have something to say that's worth saying about the guy, you have already said it, right? This guy already has a personal beef with Aaron Rodgers, and he created this circumstance because Aaron Rodgers didn't ever name him until this guy went after him.
And you know it like I know it, Stephen A. I've said a million times to you on your show, I think he's the best quarterback I've ever played against. But that doesn't in any way negate what we're seeing from him now. And then
But he's gotten old. Like, when you retired, he's just gotten old. He's gotten old, and he's beat up, and he's injured, and he's in a shitty organization. Like, there's no fucking... It doesn't make him, like, a bad person. He didn't say that he was playing great. He never once said that, right? Like, he has more interceptions and more, he's on a shitty team that has a losing record, and his play is not as good as it used to be. He's gotten old. Like, it's, he's in the retirement. It's the question is whether he's going to retire or not. He could have retired 2 years ago. I mean, that was a possibility. He could have retired last year. He could have retired this year. And if not, he'll retire next year or the year after that. But it's within the next couple of years. Like, and he's not retiring because he's got a lot left in the tank. It would be because he sucks, right? Which happens to every athlete. So, like covering him over and over again, saying he sucks, when again, he's recovering from one of the worst injuries in football on one of the worst historical organizations at the end of his career. Like, he had a really bad year and he had a broken thumb a couple years ago. He had one of his worst years and they're like, oh my God, he's playing so poorly. Yeah, he's got a broken thumb on his throwing hand, right? Like, oftentimes injuries are a factor when a guy's playing bad, and they talk about the guy like he sucks, like he's not, he's like not trying, right? It's just silly because he played. When you play sports, you know what happens, and you know what happens when you get older. It's like, you're not as good, right? And so that's not what this is about at all. This is about your personal vendetta, and you couldn't wait to jump on the guy once he did start playing poorly. And this is about his play. He doesn't give a shit about that. He said that. He said this was about you guys going after people's characters without any real information and it's more about you getting clicks or you having, corporate sponsorship. The demonization of the guys who didn't get the vaccine is a real thing, right? The Kyrie Irving thing's an example of that.
The arrogance, the smugness, the entitlement. He dis
For a guy who has a pin of his own name, and you're talking about smug and arrogance, right? Like he wasn't mad again at you criticizing his football. This has happened over his whole career. All these people who are quarterbacks, it happened to every player in the league, especially ones who are faces of the franchise. And what Giannis Antetokounmpo said, when you're winning, you're the greatest guy in the world, and when you're losing, you're like a demon. You're a devil. Like it's just that's what your job is to create these, these polarized narratives, right? But he never made it about that. Like so, this is the denial. Like you're creating something that didn't happen. You're making up something that didn't happen to justify your actions. And this is like, again, this is a microcosm of the internet. It's what's really wrong with all these media personalities because they create a profile like crazy conspiracy theorists and, Trumpers or whatever it is. And they create this, or liberals, so, in terms of Fox News and people in the internet. And they create a fictitious narrative and they put all the people that believe sort of in this sort of thing, in this particular belief system, they put them all in one category. Like we're put in the same category as QAnon people, as Cubies, right? And we're nothing like Cubies. And so this is the bullshit I'm talking about. And any person that, like, let's say you are a Trumper, and you go listen to somebody criticize Trump, and you get all your friends like the QBs used to do, and your little internet buddies, and you go out there and you troll the people because you know that Trump is the hero, and this guy must be a villain, and everybody who's not with you is a shill, and all that shit, right? Like that's all denial. That's all this bullshit I'm talking about. When you hear something that somebody disagrees with your belief system, and you can't hear it, so you have to kill that person in some way. You have to silence them. You have to censor them. And this is pretty much everyone. Everyone's a piece of shit with this stuff. They can't live that other people have different opinions than they have, right? You got to go out and kill them. You got to destroy them. And this thing, this is a clear indication because it's so transparent because the thing is goofy. It's about like, minor little pridely little, belief things people have about themselves, right?
Displays as a person when it comes to people who object or people who see things differently than him. I mean, I'm just tired of it. And I'm tired of people allowing.
Why are you tired of it? What are you tired of? They're tired of the fact that you can't see that in yourself, right? You can't see that in yourself. That you got upset with Aaron Rodgers, and as soon as he, had a moment of like, his end of career moment, you chose that opportunity to disparage his character, and he called you on your bullshit without even naming you by name. He called you as an industry, and you took it personally, and you went after him again, and he then criticized you again, and then you went on this whole rant that you did. It's complete bullshit, right? Like, and it means nothing because it has no power. Like, if you don't care about, I mean, in terms of Aaron Rodgers' endorsements, he lost endorsements, as did Kyrie Irving, because of his vax thing, right? The companies, abandoned him. And so, like, this is, in terms of taking money out of his pocket, none of this stuff is going to matter. He's going to retire. And he lost that. He used to be a State Farm guy, Aaron Rodgers. And those commercials sucked. I mean, they're even worse now. It's one of the reasons I didn't really like Aaron Rodgers because those commercials suck so bad, right? They're willing to sell themselves for, whatever, these shitty insurance organizations or whatever it is, right? But in terms of this whole thing, this guy is saying he's tired of it because you yourself engage in this, right? When you see things in yourself that you hate and you're embarrassed about, you're ashamed of, and you don't want to see and you're in denial of, and then you see it in other people and you hate it in other people, that's called projection, right? Look it up.
Him to say whatever the hell he wants to say, whenever the hell he wants to say it, without in any way pushing back. And so if you
that's when he pushed back on you, like he didn't say those things. Aaron Rodgers doesn't go after people. He's fairly positive with people. Like not like you're constantly demonized. I've seen this guy go after people's characters and be insulting to player after player and people after, all these people. And when he gets criticized, he gets butthurt and he whines and gets all aggressive, right? Well, he gets all like belligerent and like adversarial when they're doing the same thing to him that he did to them, right? And in a much more mild way. This is what I'm talking about in terms of denial.
You can come for me and my colleagues. I can respond, and I have no issue standing 10 toes down on whatever I say.
It was hard for me to, push back on his right to clap at you, RC, not about his game, but when we were on First Take that day, you're a highly intelligent brother. You're very selective with your words. You know exactly what you're saying. And you mean
yeah, that's right. Yeah, you that's exactly what I do. That's me. That's me. Yeah.
The hell you say. And you called him a fraud. And
yes.
and I want
again, Aaron Rodgers didn't say anything along those lines. You called him a fraud. And again, you're a fraud, bro. Like you're just like all these things that you're saying are things that you do, and you're unaware of it. Like he's completely oblivious to it, right? And when the truth is put in his face or whatever, he pushes back on it in a way like this is, a prime example of denial.
To expound on why did you feel the need to go to that length? And based on you saying that, do you feel like that gave him the right to respond to you the way that he did?
This is actually a good question by Stephen A. Smith.
One, first off, he absolutely has a right to respond to me in any way that he wants to. He's a grown man, Stephen A. And, like if you feel some type of way, like you get to say it the same way I get to respond to him. Now, what's different about us is the things that I say about him will be viewed from a professional perspective, right?
Because you didn't have a personal vendetta against him. Like he didn't give a shit about you. He called you 2-5. He didn't even call you by your name. Like, hey, 2-5, and you got pissed off about that, right? And he, there was no, and like that's where he was dismissive of you. Like he doesn't give a shit about you, right? I mean, you're obsessed with the guy. Like you have some kind of vendetta against him, bro. Like just admit that. Like and anything they says, you're like, no, you're the guy. You're the guy. It's not me. You're the fraud. I'm not the fraud. You're the fraud.
Right. I am an NFL analyst, and so in responding to Aaron Rodgers, I need to be able to respond with facts. I need to be able to respond.
A fraud. Calling someone a fraud isn't a fact. Calling somebody a fraud is not a fact, right? I mean, if it was some kind of legal situation where you're guilty of fraud, but calling somebody a fraud, like they can be a fraud, but it's, it's not something you prove factually. You can make a case for someone being a fraud, but it's opinion. It's a quality of being fraudulent, right? Of being disingenuous, of saying one thing and saying that you're doing this out of professionalism, but you're doing it because you have a personal vendetta. That's being a fraud. And that's, like you being a fraud isn't something I can prove factually, but people can see it. Like people can have a view, oh yeah, that guy's a fraud. Like everyone can be convinced of it, right? But it's not something like, a characteristic that's some scientific based fact, right? It's, subjective analysis of somebody's behavior. And it's opinion based. Your opinion of somebody, oh, that guy's a fraud. That guy's, an asshole, right? Like it's not, an asshole isn't something that's definitive, but you can have lots of people, everyone in the world go, yeah, that guy's an asshole. And the guy's, yeah, I'm an asshole. Like, you all agree upon it. Yeah, something different, but it's not factual.
With things that are true. I can't just come out and insult his fashion. I can't just.
You mean, because he consulted your pin? You calling him a fraud isn't factual. Like, do you understand facts? You're in the fucking media. You're supposed to be a journalist. Yeah, you're a football player, but you have to understand the word fact. Calling him a fraud isn't a fact, especially when you have a personal vendetta against it, that you're blinded by your hatred for him, right?
Come out and say things that make zero sense, like state your vaccination status.
It makes total sense to the rest of us that, he was demonized for that. Aaron Rodgers lost he was State Farm's biggest guy, and they got rid of him. And then, the Packers ended up not renewing his contract, and he was a free agent. They decided not to. They traded him to the Jets, right? Because of, he fell from grace because of what happened with that. And we all know what happened with Kyrie Irving and all of these other people. We know the pressure that was there. And so you guys who caved to that pressure or just were, people who are naturally shills anyway and just agree to it and never question it, which would be your job as a person who's seeking the truth to maybe question some of these, the powerful industry that dominates your life. Him calling Aaron Rodgers a fraud and him being biased against him and calling that factual, like this is what I'm talking about, denial. As opposed to Aaron Rodgers saying, if you're going to criticize me, state your vax status, which you ended up doing, which we all knew you got it because you work for ESPN Disney. And they have this financial association with Pfizer and these other big pharma companies. So, like, that's a real thing. There's a bias there. I've said it myself about all these people in the media that they should have a dildo, like, aiming out their mouth as they talk about these big pharma things, because big pharma supports your job. You're making big pharma money, just like Aaron Rodgers was making State Farm money. And so, like, him talking about State Farm, you have to understand that he's shilling for them. But he's, in the commercials, right, where you guys work for a network that fired anybody who didn't get it and was fired anybody who would have criticized it. So you had no choice. There was never a choice for you to criticize it publicly or privately, in terms of like a blog or something, like you or some kind of social media thing. You couldn't do it on ESPN, sure, but you couldn't do it anywhere else, right? And Aaron Rodgers and people who did were demonized by you and your network and your cronies because you're all getting Pfizer money. And so, like, that's a fact, bro.
Right? I don't get to do that. I have to be factual. I have to be to the point. I have to be clear.
Okay, that's not calling him a fraud, calling him slimy. Like, he was the one guy that lied. It was slimy because he, it wasn't even a lie, but as much as you can call it deceptive. These guys are lying all the time about injuries. They're lying all the time about, football is like the Patriots, and they're spying and they're all that, all the shit that goes on that's slimy. You called him slimy and a fraud, and you didn't hold anybody else to those standards, including yourself, right? And that's factual? No, I got to be factual. He just throwing out random stuff about vaccines and vax status. But when I talk, it's factual, even though it's opinion, because I'm giving my opinion, but it's got to be based in facts. And it's, again, this view, like the women on The View, using the mainstream beast as an authority, right? It's that level of denial. Yeah, I covered The View in my last video, this bullshit that Joy Behar was saying, that pretty much we all know. So, this is the people who are conscious, awake, and aware that the system is lying to us all the time, and people who are shilling for the beast. And you're on that side of things, right? You're on the power of the abusive, evil empire. And we all have to support the evil empire. But some of you guys don't reconcile or even contemplate this decision that you have to, do things that you don't believe in based on an empire that is destructive and hurtful to everybody, right? All of us. That we all have to support the empire even though we don't want to. But you guys love it. Like you guys don't have an issue with it at all. You just go out there and shill for the evil empire. And then when you got called in your bullshit, you use the evil empire as a way to support your inability to confront your own hypocrisy and your own weakness and your own fraudulent behavior, right? And then you call other people those names because, like you don't want to look in the mirror, right?
And so, yeah, like if I call him a fraud, he can respond to that. But you are a fraud if you're sitting on ESPN being paid by Pat McAfee, who later admitted that he pays him because of what having Aaron Rodgers on his show does for him. I in no way got a problem with that. But
okay, so I'm just going to end this thing, but I've described this before. That what Aaron Rodgers was criticizing was these guys looking for clickbait and looking to, pop on social media and pop on the network by saying controversial things, by throwing people under the bus and going after their characters, which they need to do to, fill the void and make these shows interesting. They have to say controversial takes, which other people on the show disagree with because they're just opinions, and they don't fucking matter because they're just these dopey fucking ex-football players and guys who never grew up and are sports analysts, and they have an obsession with something that, is basically a kid's game, right? And like the whole thing is meaningless, right? and then to go after people personally because you're getting paid, you're a certain kind of piece of shit, right? Which Aaron Rodgers was calling out. What he does on Pat McAfee is not going after people. He's not critical of people. He doesn't name people. He doesn't, he sometimes talks about, like, he went after Fauci a little bit, some of these things, in a very mild way. Aaron Rodgers is mild in the way he goes after people. But that isn't the same thing that these guys do on ESPN. And so he's not a fraud. Like, you don't understand the distinction here. It's not just nuanced. It's quite different. Okay, so, again, this guy always tries to have it two ways. First thing he's saying is Aaron Rodgers is a hypocrite because Aaron Rodgers is doing the same thing he's doing on Pat McAfee. But then he says, no, I have to be factual, and I have to be concise, and I have to be to the point, and I have a different standard because I'm an actual journalist. Well, which is it then? Is Aaron Rodgers doing the same thing you're doing, or are you doing something different? Like, you can't have it both ways, right? But it's just making up whatever you want to be reality, changing the facts to fit your feelings. All right, let's get into the other stuff here. So for whatever Trumpers that are left here, this goes with it, right? This idea of denial. Pete Hegseth is going to praise John Fetterman. And this has nothing to do with John Fetterman being praiseworthy or Pete Hegseth believing John Fetterman is praiseworthy. So it starts off here. So this guy's trying to tell him you go this way, right? This guy, watch him. He's going to tell him you go this way right here. Like, this guy's pointing. He's trying to point to him, you're going the wrong way. So they head the wrong way.
Mr. Hegseth, do you think you can get Democratic support?
It's so weird. That just everything about that was not right.
Sorry,
Everything about that was not right and weird. I mean, this is how fucked up. These people are waiting outside of John Fetterman's office to find out how the meeting went between the mentally handicapped and, doofus, professional doofus, John Fetterman, and a guy whose mom wrote a letter begging the guy not to be such a piece of shit womanizer, who's now up for defense secretary when he's got allegations of really abusive behavior and the things that he's willing to admit to being, an alcoholic and a womanizer in his past until he found Jesus. And they had a meeting, and these people are just waiting outside to find out how the meeting went. Like, that's how fucked up this thing is, right?
All right. Flatten back out. That's the second thing. Okay. All right.
Okay, so then he's like, all right, we went the wrong way.
I thought you were getting the hang of this by now.
More time with the press. It was a wonderful meeting. He's thoughtful. He's independent-minded. Defense, as I...
It was a wonderful meeting. He's thoughtful and independent-minded. The guy's got to look at his screen to have a conversation with you because he can't understand what the fuck you're saying. And sometimes it's simplest things because he has whatever cognitive issues from a stroke and he wasn't great before that. He's a complete fucking disaster. And he's one of my joys here in the political world because he shows you how the government isn't going to implode because somebody who can barely function and is like completely damaged can be a part of it. But there's all these old people people who are senile in office, our president's senile, like these things, right? It shows you that the government is, it works beyond the personalities that are supposed to have the power, right? But this guy, if John Fetterman was criticizing him, or what did this guy probably say about John Fetterman? I don't know if there's some tape on it somewhere, but somewhere like when he was on Fox News, did Pete Hegseth say anything about John Fetterman. Like, probably made fun of him. And so, maybe he did, maybe he didn't, maybe it didn't come up in terms of what he covers on Fox News, but he certainly would have been. Fox News is making fun of Fetterman all the time. But because Fetterman's open to this guy's point of view and might vote for him, all of a sudden he's a great guy, right? And all you guys who are Republicans and know that Fetterman is unfit for office and you're Trumpers, and now you see this guy who's a Trump guy coming in and praising Fetterman, it shows you how fucking fake this whole thing is, right?
I've said is not political. National security is important to Democrats and Republicans. A great conversation with the senator, and that's all I'm
Are there any other Democrats that you've talked to?
Great conversation with the senator. Has anybody had a great conversation with Fetterman? Like, do you see when he was on Joe Rogan and Joe Rogan had to piecemeal things together? You see when he's on The View? He can't hold a conversation. He has to have he's got to have a device between you and between him and the person he's talking to. There's no great conversation when that's the case, right? Like where he's got to have a device interpret what somebody's saying and read what they're saying, and then even then he's diffuse and distracted, and he has trouble speaking, and he's got all these issues articulating things, and so there's no great conversations with John Fetterman. It's impossible. The guy's like he's got cognitive issues, right? And he's got emotional issues. He's depressed and these other things. He's unconscious, right? He doesn't know what the fuck he's doing. Great conversation. Okay, so I was going to cover the orbs, the drones and the orbs, but I ran out of time here because I did such a long introduction. I don't know if the story's disappeared. You have to go look at my comments too. I haven't read my comments in like 2 or 3 days, so I have to go do that. And then I'm going to take some time off. Today's Saturday, and my wife and I are going to watch some stuff and make an early day. But I just want to add one more thing. Going back to what Ryan Clark was saying at the beginning when he was, upset at Aaron Rodgers invoking the anti-vax people and the people who are on the right and the people who agree with them, because they realize this is a powerful demographic of activated people. And I don't agree with their behavior. Anybody on the internet that pounds and piles on and trolls. But he knew, like, Aaron Rodgers was invoking these people because of it, right? And that, they're a group to be concerned about. And so if you're thinking you're a voice of the people or you're, connecting with the audience, and you can look at it like all the anti-vax people are Republican Trumpers, but that's not the case. There's plenty of people who are Democrats who are, a lot of this stuff for this kind of healthcare alternative healthcare came from the hippie movement. Food and food and his health stuff, and is not and many people in the African American community were anti-vax because of Tuskegee and other reasons, and a lot of them are becoming vegans and are eating more healthy food. And all these athletes have to take a look at it. Like it's widely known in the world of modern day sports that you have to eat better, and a lot of these guys have personal chefs and they're moving towards eating foods that are not the kind of foods that all of us grew up on, and specifically people who are in urban poor areas, poor areas around America, not just urban, but where poor people live. The food is atrocious, right? People shop at Walmart and go to fast foods and things. And so it isn't like something based in race or based in political ideology. Lots of people are aware of this. This is something that people are resonating with Kennedy. And then all the people who are, who were anti-vax before, and, the people who are very pro-vax, where are they now? You don't hear those people on the internet anymore, right? Those people have disappeared. But this other movement still exists because Big Pharma, so many people are anti-Big Pharma and anti-Big Pharma shills. And so for this guy to come out and say that he thought that was a low blow, like Aaron Rodgers invoking this mob of people when it's not appropriate, well, he was demonized, and that's what he's going to be seen as. That's what I'm commenting on this. If he didn't get demonized the way he was, I would have never been, this thing would have been not important to me. I would have ignored it. But he was, and we all are, all of us who saw what happened and all of us who suffered, who were censored and, ostracized and demonized and all the things that we suffered because we didn't want to put that shit in our body, right? Like all of us who didn't want to make that choice. And, you know, we're not forgetting the way we were treated and all you shills that were pushing for it. Not just for yourselves, but came in with a hard sell and demonized anybody who was against it. And you guys were all part of that. And the sad fact in these guys' reality is that they are on the big pharma side of things, right? Because they work for Disney, ESPN. They're always going to be part of these evil corporations, right? You know, it's like these people in the media that were shocked that Americans were not pro CEO, right? That the Americans, oh my God, I can't believe they're siding with Luigi. Like, it was just ridiculous. I can't believe they're siding. It's so horrible, right? The people on The View, the bitches on The View, and all these people. I can't believe they're treating a CEO this way, or they're not sympathetic to a CEO. This was a man with a family, like this kind of stuff. They knew exactly how people feel. That's why Trump's president, right? For whatever legitimacy behind Trump presidency, there is a major movement of people who are anti-government, anti-CEO, anti-big business people, anti-media, and we're not into you. Like, most people dislike you, and you're a part of this evil corporation. And just your association with it, it's a blemish on your, what people think about you. And so that's always going to be there for you, and you can't whine about it because, you're in this situation where everybody knows that you can't say certain things, lots of things, and, for the people type things, because your bosses and handlers will push back against it. You'll be fired. And so your opinion's not your own. You may say it is, but you know, and we know that there's lots of things that you can't say or can't go there because of those things. And, you've taken the money. Like, all right, you took the money. You want the position. You want your little Emmys and your things that you use to validate yourself. And, of course, money's great. Money's money, right? So, in the popularity and the, I'm on TV and all that shit that you get out of that. And there's a price you pay for it, right? The price you pay for shilling for the evil, beastly system. We have an evil empire, and you guys are on the side of the evil empire. And so, don't whine about it when people come after you for that, because that's what you're known as. You want to be want to be an independent person, be an independent person. You have a following. You can make a living doing that. Start your own podcast, whatever. I mean, do something. You guys already are doing that because you're trying to have it be in both worlds, but you're never going to be a true, alternative to modern day media. I mean, Stephen A. Smith said he saw the writing on the wall that, all the, like what Pat McAfee's doing. I mean, whatever Stephen A. is getting, it ain't going to be $500 million. And so what Pat McAfee was able to tap into, a lot of it came from Aaron Rodgers, is from that, this is what people want. It's the Joe Rogan stuff and the rest of it. And like people who are sincere and can give their own opinions unvarnished by corporate interests, or even if they are, it's like a lot less than you get when you work for ESPN or CNN and Disney and these other companies, right? And everybody knows it. Like, everyone knows, like you're the dinosaurs of the past. You're the modern day dinosaurs, and you're gonna be, you're being, you're going extinct. You're being extincted by the fact that these people, young people, want no part of your bullshit, right? They want sincerity. They want authenticity, and you can't give that on your shows, right? Your varnished shows where you guys feign fake outrage for shit that, lots of people feel the exact same way as Kyrie Irving and Aaron Rodgers. The outrage and the bullshit and the sanctimonious stuff and shame on you shit that you guys do. Shame on you, right? How dare you? How double dog, double dutch dare you? Right? That was shit. How dare you?
How dare you?
Freaking out.
How
You're
dare
freaking out.
you?
It's
How
all right.
dare
Settle
you?
down.
Anything
How
you
dare
want
you?
that, but the bottom line
How
is very
dare
clear.
you?
When you
How
cross
absolutely
the border
dare you, sir?
illegally, you
How
have
dare
given
you?
up the
How dare you be so flippant, man?
Well, we say, how dare they?
That's just wonderful. And so, this is just the sanctimony and the bullshit. We're all tired of it. And, again, and the insincerity and the lack of authenticity. And so people who have embraced that, it's gone the other direction, right? Like, people are realizing it's just bullshit and it's just, like it's just fake. And there's no future in it. And so, like, they know this, right? They're aware of all this stuff. And so, anyways, let me wrap this one up here. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano, definitely pointing for the apocalypse and the ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful. just to go back to what I was saying in the original voiceover, that a true faithful person is a person who accepts everything as God's will and that everything is happening for a divine reason, a divine purpose. It's hard to do, right? But, some of us are dabblers in that and work towards it. I always talk about being grateful for everything that's coming from God. And you're getting exactly what you should be getting. And there's no victims. There's no pride. This idea of being prideful, like so what Stephen A. Smith said, that, 25, whatever his name is, Aaron Clark was a proud black man. So with anybody going after him, he was going to have to go after him. What if the person was telling you the truth, though? Like, despite your race, because he said there was some, especially a white guy going after him. That's what Stephen A. Smith said. But what about someone just telling you the truth, right? Despite your own personal prejudice towards Aaron Rodgers or your, whatever attitude you have because he's a white quarterback or his position because he's, he plays on offense, you play on defense, whatever it is, right? Whatever your personal bullshit is. A truthful person, this is what I say about truthers, when the truth is told about you, like if you are self-aware, like you understand your negatives, like, for the most part, I mean, there's things inside me that are positive that I may or may not recognize. And maybe the things that I do that are bad, I minimize them, right? Like I excuse them like everybody else, I rationalize them. But I'm never shocked, like I said earlier, when somebody says something that's legitimate. And I say, yeah, I do that, right? Like if Ryan Clark just came out and said, yeah, I have personal prejudice and beef with Aaron Rodgers. And, I know this is when I do these kind of things, it'll give me more attention and it'll boost ratings and my bosses will be happy with me. And, I have to do those things. And, he's right that I like being a star and I like the attention and this is the price I have to pay. And, I have to go after players and criticize their characters. If he just was honest about that, right? If he just came clean and said, yeah, Aaron Rodgers is right. Because he is right. What he originally said. But instead he tried to divert the argument and say, well, I do, denying what he does and then saying that he does the exact opposite. He's a journalist and he's factual and all that bullshit that he said, right? When, you just be honest. Be honest with yourself. Even if you're not honest with everybody else, like know it in yourself that, yeah, that's true. What he's saying is spot on. But when you can't accept the truth and you go to extraordinary effort to put up defense mechanisms and divert the blame and deflect the blame and gaslight, this is all stuff that's a part of the arrogant official story where we're the people who are the knowers, we're a part of the official beast, we're a part of the, we're endorsed by the truth because we subscribe to the beastly story, the official story, and we're backed by the official story, so we're the people with the integrity and we're the people telling the truth because look, you can't fact check me because the facts that we're getting are from the beast and the beast says this, right? But the rest of us who are beyond that see that you're like you're not only a shill and a sellout, but you're fraudulent and you're lying to yourself, right? Especially if you come from a demographic that has historically been prejudiced against by the beast, by the evil empire, and you embrace your part in that demographic, and yet you sell out to the very people that enslaved and abused your demographic that you identify with. And so, all these types of things, when you just can be honest, when you understand what you have, your own liabilities, you're not, defensive about it. Like you guys just accept you're flawed. We all are, and we're living in a shit world and a difficult, we've been indoctrinated and we've been trained to do the wrong thing and be unnatural and all these things. And those of us who are trying to work our way, through that, and the beast is still trying to pull you in and, break you or whatever the system has to do to people who go against it or who are looking for a way out of the beast, right? We're looking for a backup plan, a plan B or something different. And so, that comes mostly from, the divinity within you. And, like I said, for me personally, the threshold for being a good person or being the best, rising up to the highest level of human evolution in terms of character and development, it's that 100% of one's energy this is a Sajmark teaching, and the example was this guy Babaji and the other two masters, but particularly him, where he gave every ounce of his energy, every thought that he had, every bit of energy, he went into serving God. Not letting his mind just wander and have daydreams and indulging in things that were not part of his spiritual path, and indulging in material life like we all do, and which isn't a bad thing, but there's a higher level. Like, it's not that that's horrible, but there's a higher level where you give up your right to party, and your right to indulge, and your right to have the wrong thoughts, your right to make the mistake, and you just do whatever God needs you to do. You're constantly in a state of serving God. You're always asking God, what can I do for you now? What do you want me to do now? Right? And then doing it, right? And then devoting yourself 100% to that pursuit. And that's, the example in the Sizemore system. And so that's a very high bar. And I wish it wasn't that, but it is that, right? Like, it's what I believe to be, that if you're going to evolve to the highest, that's what you have to do. And, as much as I don't want to fully embrace that, and I have my personal struggles with it, I understand that that's, what human beings are capable of. And as you move forward on a spiritual evolutionary path, that's what you end up being, a complete servant of God. No, self-indulgence whatsoever, no egotistical indulgence, just a 100% commitment to serving God in every capacity, in every way, being a conduit for the divinity to flow through you, and working to uplift your brothers and sisters as your service to God. And that's the example that's given by these masters in the Sizemore system that I've experienced, right? And so, in all that, like, everything that deviates from that is just like, I'm not doing what I know I should be doing, right? Like, I'm not living up to that standard, and, I can't right now, or I won't. It doesn't matter which, and both are true. We can't and won't. But at some point, as you get older and you mature and you go forward in your spiritual path, and it's possible to achieve something like that, right? But like, all these egotistical indulgences and pride and, arrogance and, not wanting people to say shit about you, it's all silly shit, right? Things are either true or they're not, and it doesn't matter what anybody else says. It matters what's true. It matters what you are and what you need to do. And we're all falling short to some extent. Most people are falling short in a big way. And just accepting that, like, not in a defensive way. People who know they're like, there's criminals, and if you tell the person you're a criminal, they'll try to physically attack you, right? Like, they know that they're convicted criminals and they're horrible people, but they can't take the least amount of truth. They figured a way to rearrange their reality so they think of themselves as the victim or the hero. Everyone think of themselves as the victim and lashing out, but just take responsibility and you get rid of the denial of what you truly are, like good and the bad, because most people are really in denial about what they are in terms of their negative egotistical tendencies, their character flaws, but they're even more scared and more in denial of their divine inner nature. They're scared of their divinity within them. And that's why there's so few saints, because people are scared of what's best inside of them. Even they're scared of the inner saint more than they are scared of the inner demon. And they're willing to admit to their dark side, but they're scared of the divinity, the light within them. And that's why humanity is where it is. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano, definitely important for the apocalypse. And the ascension, everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.